how long to do when he was 60.
He kept going.
66.
Wonderful.
He didn't give up. He told her that one day he was going to be doctor.
That was fantastic.
He got his doctor ministry when he was 66 or something like that. And she was there.
Well, yeah, we have so many good stories about, and I try to pass them on to my children. I have an older sister, and she was retired. I just come back to her. She can stay home. It's so much energy. You know, and she's sort of the family historian. But I think that my family, I know that she knows my family, my husband, my children, my family. And so I could just laugh to go in downstairs and sure that she has the whole picture. Because we were something because we were not really together. And she had a military family. She was in Germany for many years. But you have to piece it together because it's so much my children.
Yeah.
The stories in there.
Right, right. They got to have something there. My daughter seems most interested in the stories right now. My son doesn't seem as interested. Yeah, he'll be 26. He'll be 26.
Let him have a child.
Yeah.
He'll get hooked again when he realizes the future. I don't know these stories. I got to learn. I got to pass them on now. I have a duty. I tell you, my son, my oldest son, is very interested and fortunately, I saved everything. And I was saved, so he's got a lot to go. That he's never seen that. Okay, no, I did not. You know, that hard work, you know, first birthday time. So, how are you? It's a Mexican. So and you, of course. Linda. Okay, thank you. Hi there, how are you? Congratulations. Oh, thank you so much. You are wonderful. Thank you. Hi, how are you? I made an honor. Hi, Terry. Tara. Good to meet you. Thank you very much. I'm very honored. Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm getting right there. Why don't you do that yourself?
I don't have anything else, so we'll just...
I'm going to try to get everybody. Last time we did, I wanted to get everybody to move down closer.
Lily, this is what we didn't say.
You have a...
Let's let that top stay off. Let it go.
Yeah.
Okay. I just have...
I can give her another little phone. She has one now. He has his mic to record it.
I've already had one answer.
I need another one for that.
How are you? Good.
How are you? This is your series, isn't it? It's really wonderful to do this because, you know, this audience over here, but they do have videotape too. They used to concerts and places. The other people on the country, they have this, I know the others, but I don't know the other ones. Now, which way do you want me to be?
You're right here.
Okay.
I'm going to have folks move up a little closer so we can be a little more intimate. You can feel down towards the front, that would be great. Just up a couple more seats.
No, I did this.
Well, some of you come down on the front row because it'll make the conversation much more intimate. So some of you will come face down in this area.
Are you burned though? No.
Already said?
Hello, Tyree.
Hey, how are you? You doing well?
I'm doing fine.
He was going to mic her for the room. She's mic'd for the video, but he's going to put a mic on her for the speakers here in the room.
But then you take a risk, because then sometimes I think people do that. And then
Right there at the top of my list. There you go. And come on.
All right, we'll go ahead and get started this morning, or I guess this afternoon now. Thank you all for joining us today. My name is Lilia Neville, and I'm the co-chair for UT's Commission for Blacks, and it's my pleasure to provide the introductions for today's event. This year is the inaugural year of the Trailblazer Series. The intent of this series is to highlight the accomplishments of African Americans in the UT community and within the annual Speaking Series. The series is brought to you by the Commission for Blacks as well as the Office for the Vice Chancellor for Diversity. So today we continue the series with Ms. Rita Geyer, and you can learn more about the overall series at trailblazer.utk.edu. I am thrilled to introduce Mr. Halloran Hilton Hill as our moderator for this series. Mr. Hill is a talk radio host on News Talk 98.7 WOKI Knoxville and the television talk show host of Anything is Possible on WBIR TV in Knoxville. Mr. Hill also works as a singer, songwriter, author, motivational speaker, and trainer. He wrote Who Would Imagine a King, along with Mervyn Warren, which was recorded by Whitney Houston for the film The Preacher's Wife, and was included on the film's Grammy-nominated soundtrack. So let's all welcome Mr. Alan Hill. It is now my privilege to introduce Ms. Rita Sanders Geyer. Ms. Geyer, formerly the Associate to the Chancellor and Senior Fellow at the Howard Baker Center for Public Policy at UT, led efforts to achieve the university's intercultural and diversity goals and to promote solutions critical to public policy issues. She assumed these positions after an extensive career in public service, most recently as the Executive Counselor to the Commissioner of the Social Security Administration. Born in Memphis, Tennessee, Ms. Geyer graduated from Memphis Melrose High School and earned her Bachelor's of Arts from Fisk University. After earning a Master's of Arts in History from the University of Chicago, she returned to Tennessee to teach at Tennessee State University in Nashville. Ms. Geyer earned her J.D. Juris Doctor degree from Vanderbilt University Law School in 1970. Ms. Geyer has received the Presidential Rank Meritus Executive Award from President Bill Clinton, is a fellow of the National Academy of Public Administration, and continues to work for equal justice and opportunity. Let's welcome Ms. Rita Geyer.
Can everybody hear me? Can everybody hear me? Ms. Geyer is wearing a microphone, so you should be able to hear her a little bit more. But thank you for being with us today.
I'm glad to be here. See so many familiar faces and new ones. It's good to be able to see again.
Let me start here. As she's reading this list of accomplishments, I noticed you were nodding, and maybe you were marking off the years, the experiences.
Years.
We were having a conversation, though, on yesterday, and you started teaching at TSU. I think you told me you were 22 years old.
That's correct.
I would love to start there, because when I look at these beautiful, fresh faces here, how, any of you 20? Is anybody 20? Do we have any 22-year-olds here? We have a 22-year-old in the back. Did you think at 22 you'd be sitting here listening to that list of accomplishments? What was in your head at age 22 as you started teaching at TSU?
At that point, I really I came to TSU after getting my master's degree at the university, and I really, the course at that point, trajectory, was to teach at college. I wasn't sure I wanted to teach in college, so I sought out an experience to do that. It was viewed kind of as an interim period. I did not see college teaching necessarily as my future, but I needed to find out if there was something else for me to do with the PhD in history.
So when you started teaching, I guess you found out that teaching wasn't the thing.
I found out that teaching wasn't the thing, and I also came to realize that lurking in the back of my mind had always been the desire to do something more immediate. I always viewed teaching, and please pardon me if I'm contradicting your ideas, but I always viewed teaching as sort of changing the hearts and minds of people for the future. I felt a great sense of immediacy and urgency when I was 22 years old. And I was less concerned about the future than our rights tomorrow. And I quickly figured out that the way in which I could make a difference in that arena was in law. Change was happening, not quickly enough, but it was happening. Lawyers played a very central role in that, and that's where the action was, so to speak. And I wanted to do that. So it didn't take me long, really a year, of the teaching experience to realize it was not for me, not anything against teaching, but it didn't meet my need to contribute now.
Let's talk about growing up. You are the daughter of a preacher and a teacher.
Magic combination.
I am the son of a preacher and a teacher, so less magic, but quite a combination. Talk to me about growing up and the influence of your parents and how that kind of set you up for the life that you've lived.
Wow, that's an enormous topic for me, because I think both of my parents were terrific role models. My father was a minister and the United Methodist Church, but he pastored a church for a while, and I mean pastored. You know, we moved their ministers around every few years, so it contributed to my growth very significantly. I learned adaptability. I learned to make omelets out of broken eggs or whatever. My mother was the influence in my life that did that. She always made eat the raw foods and adventure, and it's hard for children when they have to leave their peers in school, etc. My mother, because she was married to a minister from Woonsocket, and taught primarily as a substitute. She taught in rural schools. I went to school as early as 3 in Lebanon, Lehman's Corner. If you have any idea what Lehman's Corner must denote, It's a little whistle-stop rural place outside of Lebanon somewhere. And my mother taught there. It was a 2-room school, perhaps 3, for grades up through 6. It was a block school. Most of the kids that I went to school with had to get up before dawn and catch a bus from wherever they lived to ride to Women's Corner. But I went to that school with my mother. That was daycare at that time. And in that school, and Mr. Hill and I were talking about this yesterday, I learned to read at an early age. I was in school. I knew the discipline of sitting still and, with a book and listening. And it was a wonderful kind of introduction to a world which I continue to pursue. We also lived in Nashville, which was a big opportunity, big city. And there, because my mother had gone to Tennessee State, we were able to take advantage of a lot of things that a college had to offer, drama and we had some advanced lessons there and some other things, but anything that young people could do in college, she pushed us into it, and we enjoyed that. I think what I'm saying is that I was fortunate to have a lot of exposure at a pretty early age, and my parents always valued education, and wherever we lived. We lived in Pine Bluff, Arkansas, which is also the site of what we call it, Arkansas State at Pine Bluff now. It was AM and N when I was there. And, my parents were very engaged in the university life there. They not only knew, a lot of the faculty, but we were in activities that were connected with the university. So I think that my parents maybe subliminally geared me towards higher education. I began to value it early. I knew people, John Walker, who was the first black person at the University Law School at the University of Arkansas, was down the street from us, and he was sort of I had a crush on him, actually. He was a sharp guy. But, these were people in my neighborhood, and I thought that they were trailblazers, so to speak. And some of that kind of rubs off on you because, it's not impossible. You know people who've done it. And civil rights lawyer Harold Flowers was a neighbor up the street. I say this somewhat in mixed emotions, but this was one of the benefits of segregation. We all lived together. And, the powers that be were your neighbors and the people who were being brought along were also your neighbors. So you get a different perspective on life and community and opportunity.
Crushes can be very motivational.
Yeah. He was an NAACP lawyer. He was a fine lawyer, too.
So let me pick up from there then. It seems that your parents gave you a love for learning, an exposure to opportunity, an exposure to people that had accomplished things. So accomplishment was in the air. I wondered, though, did your father give you, I've talked to a lot of preachers' kids. As a preacher's kid, was there, out of your faith, a call for justice?
Oh, yeah. That was very big. This was an era when, the early 60s, I knew that people were fighting battles in court. I knew that people were very concerned about about the injustices and the disparities in opportunity, and education was of course one of those. And even though I grew up in a community that valued education and enjoyed a lot of its benefits, I knew that it wasn't the education that some other people in society were getting. And I only mentioned something else about my father. I talked about my mother, but my father stopped pastoring the church and became the head of education, executive secretary for the education for the central jurisdiction. And I put that in quotes because the central jurisdiction was the segregated United Methodist Church in the South. Okay? So he was the head of education for all of that. So I got a lot from him in terms of Christian teaching. In fact, he published a newsletter, and I talked about this with my sister. All the children were involved. We used to run those things up on an old mimeograph machine. But, you know, we also read them, and we knew his life as an example. He went around the South during the early civil rights era, I think from 1960, 1956, 1950, early 1950, 1954, etc. And he conducted leadership development courses for, unfortunately there were not women in them. They were African American men for the most part. I mean, I don't remember seeing many women in those classes at the time. But this was what he did, and I think that he had an influence in preparing black men to stand up, to take some stands, to stick their necks out, you know, to push the envelope and supported the courage that a lot of them did demonstrate in their local communities. I mean, there were heroes in Pine Bluff, Arkansas. There were people whose names you will never know who did things just as admirable as those that are in the history books. And those of you who've had parents, and I see some nodding, you know those people. And it took a lot of community to produce a Martin Luther King. You know, it really did.
And I guess you would agree then it took a lot of community to produce a Rita Geyer.
But they did have great parents.
So let's now jump back to TSU. You teach there for a year. You realize that teaching may not be the way to use your intellect to leverage your passion for learning, your call to justice. So you go to Vanderbilt Law School.
Right.
Now, what's interesting to me is, in our prior conversation, I don't think you set out to be the person that would be part of the group of people that desegregated the state school system here, but you were acutely aware that there was a big difference between the quality of education at TSU and the other experiences that you had. Do you remember the moment that you decided, I'm curious, I don't know what to do, but I do know that there's something to do?
Well, I think it was while I was teaching at TSU. I mean, first of all, I had gone to the University of Chicago, which was a total another educational world. No lack of resources. You know, my academic advisor was Donald Franklin, and Dan Borstein was another one. And you know, I had great exposure. I had also done an exchange when I was in undergraduate school at Fisk, and had exposure to a very predominantly white school. I think there were 3 or 4 black students when I was there. And so I had seen what resources and a notion of equality, you know, could look like and what it could offer. And so when I was teaching at Tennessee State, I saw what was missing. And it was everything from curriculum, which wasn't quite as complete, and it offered the range of courses and opportunities for learning, as you might have thought. The physical plant was deteriorating and crumbling in many instances. And there was a malaise because I wasn't the only one that saw these issues. And my department head and some others were hoped for something better, but I think they did not see a way to make it better. And again, I think that my sense was that this was wrong. And my second year of teaching, I taught for 1 year completely at Tennessee State. And the next fall, I started law school at Vanderbilt. And because of that, I came into contact with my good friend, Ruth Robinson, who is now deceased. Ruth was the only other student of color attended at law school when I was there. When I started. And of course, she befriended me, and we befriended each other immediately.
Was she the first person you told, this is wrong, something needs to be done
Well, we
about
started
it?
talking about it because she was the first person that I shared my experience at Tennessee State. And she was clerking for George Barrett as a law clerk. And she said, well, hey, you got to meet George. And we were talking about, what could be done. Well, I knew something about some of the cases besides Brown, but I was not really aware of, just become a law student. And I say now that a little bit of knowledge is a dangerous thing because I started my personal research and then learned about the some of the other cases that had been decided in the Fifth Circuit and North Carolina. And, they were precursors, Texas cases. They were precursors. Cases that admitted blacks into the law school, cases that admitted blacks into, mostly they were the graduate programs at that time, where the first real inroads were made. And I said, well, why can't something happen here? And talked to Ruth along those lines. Ruth was very excited, and it would take a minute for George to get very excited. And
George Barrett was practicing law in Nashville.
George had a very successful practice in law. He was primarily a labor lawyer
What was it that you said to
in
him?
a very anti-labor state, anti-union state.
What was it that you said to George Barrett, though? Did you present him with your research, or did you just present him with your passion? What was it that made him go, there's a case here?
Well, both. And it was wonderful because as a law student, I had a first-hand legal education working on the theories and all with George and Ruth. That became the foundation of the case. George knew the cases because George was a civil rights lawyer, too. And so this was not new to him. He hadn't focused on education. He focused mostly on defending criminal rights. But it didn't take but a minute for the lights to go off for all of us. And so we saw the possibility, but then we had to come up with some theories that would apply. Because, going to college is a totally different thing. Nobody makes you go. Nobody tells you where to go. Much different from the cases that have been decided, which had to do with elementary and secondary education for the most part, and at the higher level had to do with graduate school. Big Tennessee was still sending, well, I won't say that, but I know people in the early days, Tennessee would send people out of state to go to law school rather than have them come to UT. And some people took real advantage of that and went to Yale.
We're talking to Rita Geyer, and I guess at this point in the conversation, we might note that they said in a moment they decided there was an opportunity here, but it took 38 years to come to a settlement in this case.
Okay.
So let's talk about what happened, because you guys realized there's a case, you realized that there was an injustice, you realized that there was a wrong that needed to be righted, but also a trail that needed to be blazed, doors that needed to be opened. But I don't know, I'm just sitting here now and I'm thinking, if I had said to you, this will take 38 years, sign here.
I didn't sign on for 38 years. Nobody did. I learned my legal education. A lot of my social education occurred through this lawsuit. First of all, our initial intent was to stop UT from constructing a building, physical building expansion.
Can I note here
in Nashville.
that the University of Tennessee was about to build a campus in Nashville.
Right.
So, and instead of using Tennessee State University, they were going to build a separate campus for the University of Tennessee at Knoxville, and there's a state
I
school there.
really did not see that. I saw a school that was underfunded, under everything, limited, facilities, faculty salaries, all the disparities that I knew existed 2 miles down the road, maybe about 4 miles maybe, but It's very natural to free contact. And I could not see the university, I couldn't see the state of Tennessee. See, I never made this division between UT and the rest of the educational hierarchy. That still exists, and that's been a part of an issue throughout the course of this litigation. But I couldn't see, one half of the world basically doing quite well and prospering, and the half of the world that was available and was the only availability to people of color, struggling and doing without, and really being stagnated at a time when education and those opportunities, a lot of those opportunities could only come through education. Now, what took so long? First of all, we had a full panoply of defendants. And Tennessee fought this case tooth and nail for a long time. I would say for about 2 decades. And every time we got an order, they went to the Sixth Circuit. So, there's a process here that you have to understand in terms of time. First of all, you go to court, you have an argument. The first decision in this case was to deny our request, our attempt to get a temporary restraining order to prevent the completion of this building, the physical building. The court denied that. But then it scheduled a hearing months later in August on the issue, the merits of our case, and that's the way, that's done legally. You have an issue of urgency, you bring it to the RO, maybe you win it, you have the conduct restrained or allowed, but the merits of your case, the underlying merits are not finally decided until you have a full hearing. So the court said it's over for hearing, and Judge Frank Gray Jr. was his heart. He was a man of courage. And he decided in that initial case that Tennessee, state of Tennessee, had an affirmative duty to create a unitary system of higher education. That was language that was right out of what had been decided in the cases, the elementary and secondary school cases. It was an application of that body of law to higher education that had never been done before. And so we had that, quote, victory. And the court ordered the state to come up with a plan.
The plan is 38
The plan,
years,
right, the plan was to appeal, the plan was to drag, the plan was to obfuscate, and the plan took 2 years, at least. And then we came back in, it was hearing, there was a series of hearings. We were in and out of court constantly, and every time we got some advance or some favorable hearing, the state would try it to the Sixth Circuit. And inevitably, they were bounced back, and there was another plan. We went through this for some time, and finally, some of the defendants wearied in the state, and we decided that it was time we should try a settlement. So there was a settlement in 1984 of this lawsuit, and I hoped and thought that this might be the beginning of the end. By 1984, I think I was living in Washington, D.C. at that time. I was married, was a mother. I mean, my life had gone on, and I was practicing law. But this case was always with me. It was with me when I lived in Seattle. It was with me when I lived in D.C. I would get reams of paper to read and be back, and it was just another part of my life, and it continued that way for 38 years. So the settlement that we had in 1984 was somewhat ill-fated from the beginning. It had some very good provisions in terms of providing opportunities for African American students at the predominantly white institutions. It was based on some numbers. The court was careful not to allow us or to himself call them quotas, but there were goals, and the court wanted to see some substantial progress. The fate of that, somewhat, that order, there was a lot of foot dragging, even though it wasn't an agreed settlement. There still was not a full embrace of implementation quickly. But one of the things that was most troubling about the order was there was not a disproportionate burden put on Tennessee State for creating a non-racially identifiable institution, basically. And of course, that was a situation which was seen as a threat to the future and to the existence of a very proud African American institution, educational institution, and one that has served my parents and so many of our parents.
Your mother attended
My mother
TSU.
did attend TSU, yes.
At that point, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but at that point, were the folks at TSU, did they change in their feeling about what was going on when this comes up, that you're going to have to essentially desegregate?
Well, this was a very mixed blessing because the 1984, let's say that, this sounds strange to say. I never thought of it as otherworldly to me. But the 1984 settlement offered a lot of opportunities to Tennessee State. A lot of physical improvements, money, and upgrades to faculty, etc., were in the works. And so those were things that needed to happen. But the price of that, and I think it was one that was ill-conceived ultimately, was the requirement, basically, that Tennessee State would become a 50-50 institution. And the idea behind that was that basically whites would not attend a black college. And the notion that Tennessee State was going to bear a disproportionate burden in this was the Achilles heel and the death knell, basically, because it did not yet, there wasn't, this is the heart of Tennessee State wasn't in it, and they fought it tooth and nail. And even though there were parties representing Tennessee State that were a part of the settlement agreement, it was still so unsettling to, the parties, all of us eventually, that it really, that order did not succeed.
So you get this close in '84,
Yeah.
and it kind of stalls,
Yeah.
falls apart.
Yeah.
When does it finally come full circle?
And let me say this, because this is important. Nobody had ever done this kind of thing before on a massive statewide basis. And so nobody really knew how to do it. I mean, we had the legal defense fund, we had all kinds of good minds involved in the settlement. And if you looked at the precedent at that time, we really, I think there really was a good faith belief that we could make higher education colorblind. And that was the way to give opportunity to everybody. I think we learned that we know better about that now. It doesn't have to be colorblind, and it's not as good as it's not. But it has to be fair, and has to equal, and has to offer real opportunity. And we just didn't have the experience of the foresight to see that that was really achievable at that early point, without putting some numbers out there and trying to help people do it.
When did it finally settle? What was the number amount, the dollar amount, and what was created out of the settlement?
Okay, one of the things to understand is that the consent decree, which was entered into in 2001, and the settlement agreement, which was entered into in 1984, things didn't stand still. Lots of good things happened. Other race scholarships existed and were funded throughout the state. Summer programs for minority students to go into the colleges of their choice existed throughout the state. Improvements in the colleges, campuses, Tennessee State, particularly existed. I mean, these infrastructure and capital improvements that needed to be made were made, and not without some insistence and activism on the part of the students at Tennessee State. One of the well-known actions during the course of litigation was that the students went and sat in and down at the Capitol to complain about the lack of action on improving facilities out there. And Governor, I think it was Matt Werder, actually came to campus. I think maybe the first governor to come to campus. And saw the conditions, saw the facilities, and he said, no, this is intolerable. And, changed by overnight. There's some funds in there, resources to upgrade dormitories, to upgrade the educational, the classroom, school buildings, classroom buildings, etc. So that happened. There were also a good number of people who had opportunities for faculty positions and faculty upgrades. Graduate students were funded and African Americans were given opportunities to have positions, administrative positions in colleges and universities, majority colleges and universities. And we were still, however, under court supervision, even though things were moving along during this period, and substantial progress was made. And there was a point at which, we really didn't know if this case was going to have to stay in the courts forever. And the decisions of the Supreme Court have begun to turn as well. You all might remember the Fordyce decision was one of them. And then there were some others. There was a string of cases which basically seemed to be turning back the tide on affirmative action in higher education. And in a way, this emboldened the state, and they did try to get Judge Wiseman, who was a federal district court towards the last 25 years of the case, to dismiss it. Well, Judge Wiseman quite rightfully said that no, Fordyce didn't apply here. He did not dismiss the case, and in fact, that really helped us to move towards even more gains by the state in terms of realizing that this group wasn't going away, and we better work together even more closely to get some of these things done. But we weren't concluding the lawsuit, and there was a sense that if it stayed in the courts much longer, that there would be some limitations. The tide might be turned a little bit backwards. So there was an honest interest in bringing the case to a conclusion. One was the feeling that, maybe in that case, 33 years was long enough. But also there was a sense that maybe the major gains that were going to take place had taken place, and that the court would not support some of the bolder things they might want it to do. So we got into settlement discussions with Carlos Gonzalez, who was a monitor appointed by the district court, who was a neutral. He had a mediation career, and he had mediated some civil rights cases in Alabama and I think in Mississippi too. And he was a good person, still a prisoner. So Carlos, as he said, he was a relatively young person at that time, had a name that most people in Tennessee couldn't really pronounce, and you know, he was a Cuban, basically. He was a Cuban immigrant. Came to the States when he was 7 or so. But he was the kind of neutral that we needed to knock heads, so to speak, to be an honest broker with both sides of the lawsuit, and basically to get a consent decree done. The consent decree resulted in expenditure of additional money to complete a lot of the job that had been started. Scholarships were created, were called other race scholarships. And there were incentives for whites to attend TSU, as well as minority students to go to the predominantly white schools in the state. These had begun before, but they were intensified during this period. Faculty and administrative enhancements opportunities were there, and a lot of the close integration of faculty and higher education administration took place during this period. And there was a lot of competition with Tennessee State from NTSU particularly. It's right down the road. I don't know if you know the geography there. And there were provisions in the consent decree for coordination of curriculum development, coordination of faculty, and program sharing even. The creation of the Avon Williams campus in downtown, which was a UT-built facility, was a major cornerstone of the consent decree. The state invested quite a bit of money in expanding the programs that were available there and creating the Center for Public Service and some other programs that particularly benefited the state of Tennessee because they were developing people who presumably would work for the state of Tennessee there. And it emphasized educating non-traditional students. And this was a very significant development because this brought in a lot of minority adults and non-minority adults who basically had missed their opportunity or not had an opportunity for higher education. And to have a program that was designed for working parents, for people who are older, that made offerings around work schedules and provided counseling for people who had career paths. This was a very important development, I think, and still is.
Lots of doors were opening up in higher education for traditional and non-traditional students. Let me take a few minutes now to take questions from the audience. If you have questions for, can you believe how fast the time has gone? I mean, this is a fascinating journey, but do any of you have questions from the audience for you guys? Right over here.
Yeah, hi.
How would you say things have gone in the meantime until present?
Since the consent decree. Mixed. Very mixed. Without the pressure, the presence of a court, without being under court supervision, to some extent, I think some of the goals were not as fully implemented as they should have been by the state. I think that we can see what happened at UT, and I'm very pleased to say that the leadership at UT at that time was Lauren Crabtree, UT Knoxville, Um, and I had a bit of a part in this, was to define Geyer for the post-Geyer era. First of all, the spirit of Geyer was to be inclusive of persons who hadn't had opportunities. That included more than African Americans. It included Hispanics. It also included poor whites, Appalachian people particularly, who had not had opportunities for education, higher education. So there was a broadening of the mission. And I applauded that, but on the other hand, I saw that this had to be defined in a way that did not disadvantage those that had been legally excluded, not just excluded economically, but where they had to overcome decades and generations of denial of legal access to this level of higher education. So when we created the Promise and the Pledge scholarship program, they were the progeny at UT of the Geyer settlement. We were careful to find a way to reach the population who it needed to be reached. And so those programs provided scholarships for, first of all, first-time college graduates in their family, provided scholarships for students from schools which did not traditionally send students to Tennessee, UT, and you know where those schools were. Provided, those were the cross-cutting formula, which allowed us to cut very broadly, but still be very much benefiting the people who had been most deprived. And there was some, I think there was some artistry in that, and I think it was good. But there was a period of maturation and recognition that you did not have the court power to invoke every time you felt that things weren't quite going as they should have been. We had agreed to work within a system that was broader, and my objective became, and that was one of the reasons I came to UT to work, was that I thought that the leadership was really trying to preserve the gains of the consent decree and of those decades of litigation, while at the same time broadening the benefits of higher education to a wider group of students and population in Tennessee that needed opportunity. It was artful, and it worked to a large extent. But as you all know, the history of UT is that enrollment of African Americans is struggling, and there has been continued growth. And I think there's some of you here that can better talk to that. But I think that the gains that I see here today and are substantially a real gain to a different campus than it was 7 years ago, and certainly when this litigation started. And I think we will all benefited from that. Another question?
Other questions, right here. Yes, sir.
So you said that some of the goals that the consent decree put in place weren't necessarily fully implemented and everything. And you said that the university was working to make sure that they were still trying to meet those goals and everything. So my question to you, I don't know, you may or may not know this, but the UTLSI program was discontinued at the end of the summer.
The UT what?
UTLSI program was discontinued at the end of the summer. And a group of students got together to get this program reinstated, and it was reinstated. So my question for you would be to ask, how would we continue to keep that momentum behind what those students were able to do and make sure that the university does stay true to that community and really does work to make sure that these students that come from these disadvantaged areas still have access to the university. Not necessarily just on an administrative standpoint, but what can we do as students to make sure that we keep that momentum for how well we were able to do in order to get those programs back?
Boy, that is a big question, and I don't know the answer to it. If I did, I would readily share it. First of all, I think the commitment of keeping your eye on the ball is the first thing. Don't let this die, okay? And you're the only one, and with some capital support, of course, but you need to keep the university, hold your feet to the fire in this, and so keep it your responsibility. But what can be done? I think that one of the messages that has to be clear at UT and Knoxville particularly, is that, and I've always said this, okay, funds, there may be shrinking funding, there may be crisis in, how many dollars you get per year. But no matter how many dollars you get, you need to slice them and dice them in this way, and not to the exclusion of the programs that may that have as their purpose providing opportunity for opportunity. So that's one of my messages. Don't give in to this, we don't have the money. Because if you got money for anything in higher education, it's got to provide opportunity for everybody. So as that pot gets smaller, I think that however you slice that pot, there has to be inclusion. So that's one principle that I hope that you can preach to the university too.
We're coming up on our time here. I wanted to note a couple of things. Number one, for every one of you young people in this room, this journey started when she was 22 years old. And so for all of you that are young, that youth may be one of your strategic advantages, whatever your goals are, that it's not you're never too young to pursue a valuable or valiant goal. So that's a big deal. When we were at lunch, and we'll close with this, I said, well, what do you want to communicate? And you mentioned two things. You mentioned one, that even though it was through the courts that a lot of this stuff got going and happened, that it really comes down to the hearts and minds of young people, men and women, people that live here in our country and around the world. So would you like to speak to those things?
I really would. I said I got a legal education through this lawsuit. I mean, I've lived it all my life. And I saw the twists and turns. I saw the power plays. I saw what could be done in the courts and what could not be done in the courts. And I learned that, really firsthand. So, as a lawyer, I have a very healthy love and respect for the law. But that also stems from knowing its limitations and knowing that the true work of change comes from people getting involved in making that change. The people who are affected have to own it, have to push for it. Your voices can be heard. You can make change without the protection of courts. And I think that what lawsuits do, and especially one like the Dyer case, is they can create opportunity and they can provide protection. Okay? But they are not forever. And people have to solidify those gains by their actions. Their past, the future of higher education after the consent decree was in your hands. It was in the administrator's hands. It was in the legislature's hands. Not in the court's hands. And that's where your role comes in. And I'm so happy to see so many of you here because I see a lot of nodding, and I know that you believe that you can do this. And you just must be vigilant and keep on doing it. I want to say one more thing. You are so blessed to be 21, 20, younger, because you'll never be freer in a way than you are right now. And that was one of the reasons that I was emboldened to act. In one sense, I was passionate Now listen, I didn't know any better. And I am so happy I was so ignorant. but I want to encourage you to be so idealistic and so emboldened and realize that this is your time more than any other to be that way.
One thing you said to me yesterday was it was important that you create win-win, that you create an opportunity for opportunity. So would you join me in thanking Rita Geyer?
At this point, I would like to present this token of appreciation to Ms. Geyer for her contributions today. We very much appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much, Lydia. Thank you all of you.
So thank you all for coming.